Hey everyone, it's Jenny at JC Cards. Today I'm sharing two cards which feature two different techniques using Wow Sparkles. Wow Sparkles are glitter, they're the glitter range carried by Wow. They're not embossing powder, you don't need a heat tool to get some amazing effects, and I'm going to show you two different types of effects in this video today. I'm using a variety of products, but the key ones that you'll need to use for these projects are the Wow Sparkles. As I mentioned, you can use any colours. I'm using Ice Pop and Twinklebelle. I like to punch out circles from cardstock that I've backed with double-sided adhesive and then add my sparkles onto the top of it. I use a hole punch that just fits perfectly onto the top of one of these pots, and I can see exactly what's in the pot. I do this with my embossing powders as well. So you're going to need some sparkles. And this is the Twinklebelle, so it's finer grade. I mean, you can see the gorgeous holographic pieces in that and the Ice Pop. I absolutely love it. That Ice Pop one is inspired by Catherine Pooler. And then the other key thing that you're going to need is we're going to be creating our own glitter paste, and I use the translucent embossing paste. I'm using Dreamweaver here. There are other brands available, and I like to mix in the glitter into the paste, which I'll show you in a minute. And then you're going to need some stencils. So I'm using this stencil from Altenew. All of the supplies I'm using will be listed in the description box below. And I'm going to add the stars with some ink blending first. So I'm not going to go straight in with the sparkles, I'm going to do some ink blending. And first off, I'm going to be using this Stone Blue. This is by Catherine Pooler, and I'm going to be gently blending over those stars with a blender brush. And I'm not being too careful to get a complete even coverage. I like to have some of the edges faded slightly. And I'll speed this up a little bit because you don't need to watch me do all of the ink blending. And what I'm also going to do is, because that doesn't really cover much of the card front, I'm going to take this stencil off, which I've attached to my craft mat with some sticky tape, washi tape. I'm just going to flip it round and add another strip of stars to the top of my panel. I'm using white cardstock here by Wow, which is great for embossing on, but it's also great for ink blending, as you can see. And I chose this ink colour as well because it goes really well with that Twinklebelle, which is the first sparkles that I'm going to be using for my card. This stencil is actually a double layered stencil, so you'll see in a second why I'm using this one. And this technique will work great with any stencil, though you don't need to get a double layered stencil. So now I'm going to smush out some of the translucent paste onto my craft mat. This is the Altenew craft mat, and it's great for wiping off when you're done. And these techniques with glitter, they are a little bit messy, I will admit. So I'm adding a little bit of the Twinklebelle into my embossing paste here. I like to add maybe not quite enough, just folding it in with a plastic palette knife, seeing if I like how that looks, and if not, adding a little bit more of the sparkles. Just use your own judgment to see how you like it. Bear in mind it looks slightly opaque, that paste. It dries clear, that embossing paste, so it's much better to use than the white embossing paste. You get much more of the magnification of the glitter when you use the translucent. And then I'm being very careful here. I'm smoothing over that DIY embossing paste with the second layer of the stars, which I've lined up from the stencil, and it adds a tiny little star inside each of the ink blended stars that we've already added to the panel. And I'm just carefully lifting it off. Now, because I've done this stencil twice on this panel, I have to be super careful that I don't smear the embossing paste that I've already got on there. I chose to do this straight away because obviously the embossing paste on my mat will dry and be pretty useless if I waited for the first layer of stars to dry. So you might want to bear that in mind when you're creating a pattern like this, that you're going to be shifting your stencil, and you'll see that I just caught one of the stars in that top raft of stars there, but it's okay. You can use a sand eraser or a craft knife just to remove that piece of glitter you can see in the bottom left there. Now, I had quite a lot of the embossing paste left over, so I'm using this Illusion stencil from Altenew, and because it's very intricate, I've used some pixie spray just to make it tacky on the back. That is completely temporary adhesive, but it sticks the stencil down perfectly to my cardstock. I'm using some pale blue cardstock here. And I'm just going to stick that down carefully. I'm then going to take my palette knife, and I'll speed it up here. But with stencils like this, you do have to be careful. You need to go in different directions as you smooth out your embossing paste. So I'm working from the centre out, following the direction of the rays of that spiral. And I'm trying to get it as even as I can. And then when I'm done, I'm going to immediately wash my stencil, wipe down my palette knife, wipe down my craft mat, because that stuff dries like concrete. And you can see that pixie spray, it adheres to the stencil perfectly, but it lifts up really easily and you get a nice crisp, clear outline. Now I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive. You can get this in sheets, you can get it in rolls. There's tons of different brands out there that you can use. This is just one that I happen to have in my stash. And I like to add a whole sheet to a whole piece of cardstock and then cut up the cardstock so I can use it for different colours. And what I'm going to be doing is making my own DIY glitter cardstock here. So I'm going over it, just making sure all of that double-sided adhesive is completely adhered, and then I trimmed it into A2 size panels. And for this first panel, or for this panel, I'm going to be using the Ice Pop sparkles from Catherine Pooler, and I'm just going to shake it all over my cardstock. Like you see here, I've got some printer paper underneath because it makes it easier to just funnel back into the pot when I'm done, and I have very little wastage. Now I'm using my fingers to burnish this into the adhesive. If you don't like to get glitter all over your hands, and I know that some people don't, you don't have to do this. I'm absolutely fine with it. I'm on an WOW embossing team, so I'm very used to getting embossing powder and glitter everywhere, and I love it. But some people don't. So you can take the release paper, hold it over the top of the glitter instead, and use your fingers or a bung folder just to push that glitter into that double-sided adhesive. You will, by doing this, you will get a little stuck to the release paper that's basically impossible to get off. So there's a little bit of wastage there. And then just tip off that cardstock onto the printer paper and then funnel it back into the pot. And you can pick up any excess that you might have floating around with a Swiffer cloth. That works really well for picking up glitter. And you can see I didn't really use that much, even though I've created this whole A2 size sheet of my own cardstock. And then I'll just rub it in again just to make sure all the excess is removed. And now it's ready to use however you want to. So I'm going to be die cutting mine. I'm using this set of, I think it's inside and outside stitched stars by My Favourite Things. I think they might have been discontinued, but I'm looking basically to create a starry night sky. So any star dies that you have would work great for this technique. I've also used this on a previous card on the WOW embossing blog using hearts, and you'll see how versatile this technique is. So I've die cut those stars 3 times from plain white cardstock and once from the glitter cardstock. I've stacked them together. I'm using glitter glue, art glitter glue, which dries clear, but it's very strong glue and it's perfect for stacking your embellishments. So that's what we're doing here. For this first technique, we're creating die cut glitter embellishments, and I like to add an acrylic block over the top just to keep them steady while they dry. And that's a close-up of the dried embossing paste. As you can see, it went translucent, and all that's left behind is the Twinklebelle glitter that will not rub off, and it's so pretty in real life. I'm now using this Altenew stamp set. This is called Reason to Smile, and it's got some really nice and calming sentiments in it, and I'm going to stamp this directly onto the panel, which I have mounted onto a £110 card base. I'm going to stamp it directly in VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto that panel between those 2 swooshes, I guess, of stars. And then I've futzed around with trying to work out where to put my stars for quite a while, and then once I had my layout how I wanted it, I'm just going to glue those stars down directly on top of the dried embossing paste, and that almost completes the card. However, I like to do one last little finishing touch to my embellishments, which is to use some crystal glaze. You could also use some glossy accents, but I find this is more liquid and spreads out and dries quicker, although it still takes overnight to leave it to dry. So I left it overnight, and you can see, look at that shine. It magnifies that glitter. It's unbelievable in real life. So pretty. Absolutely love this technique for showing off those wow sparkles. And here's a close-up just where the light captures those embellishments. Now for my second card, the embossing paste has dried, so you can see there the white has gone away and you're just left with that super shiny Twinklebelle. And I've got this Hugs die, again this is by My Favourite Things, and I've die cut it from that scrap of Ice Pop DIY glitter cardstock. And you can see if you cut it into the A2 sheets, you can use it several times on several cards. And then again, I'm doing the same thing. I've die cut it 3 times from white cardstock, and I'm adhering them all together with liquid glue. Now I've trimmed down my card panel slightly because I was a bit off with that circular piece of the stencil being in the centre, and I've adhered it to a £110 card base. Now I was going to leave it like that, but I felt like it was missing something. So I decided to stamp out and heat emboss this HENNAH Elements stamp by Altenew onto some blue vellum. And I'm using metallic platinum embossing powder from WOW for this. And heat embossing on vellum is so quick. I haven't even had my heat tool heating up, and it's unbelievable. I'll show it in real time just how quick on vellum the embossing powder melts. I just love watching it. And I'm going to fussy cut that out with my EK Success Cutter Bees, which are my super sharp scissors, and I really like them for fussy cutting. And this is what I'm left with, and I can just pop it into the centre. Now vellum is always a little tricky when it comes to adhesive because you don't want it to be showing through. So what I'm going to do is adhere that flower to the back of the Hugs word, and then I'll flip it over, add more liquid adhesive hidden behind the Hugs die cut, and then adhere it to the centre of my card. And I will pop an acrylic block on top of it just to make sure that all of that glue dries in the right place. And when it's dried, I'll go over it with the Crystal Glaze as I did with the stars. And here's a close-up of what that looks like. I hope this gave you some ideas for how to use wow sparkles on your cards. If you enjoyed this video, there's tons of others on my YouTube channel. If you want to be reminded when I've got a new video, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to be reminded. I also recommend checking out the Wow Embossing YouTube channel for lots of other heat embossing tips and tricks, and I will link it in the description box below. Have an awesome day. Bye!